Welcome to the least educational series of all time. Nellie Nutgraph reports on the biggest stories in history, but it's a wacky version where everything is happening at once, including a lot of things that didn't happen. Of course, George Washington didn't take a selfie that was used for the $1 bill. So don't go putting that on your homework or you'll get a big F-. As a newspaper reporter, Nellie is always looking for the big story. Some of her stories are featured in this book. She's determined to uncover an even bigger story, big enough for the front page of the big city big news. And she'll do anything to get it, even ride on a stampeding buffalo. Will it be tough? Yes. Will it be dangerous? Yes. Will it be historically accurate? Never. Chapter 1. Hey, it's me, Paul Bunyan. Remember? The tall guy with the axe and the ox? I'm about to tell you another story about Nellie Nutgraph, the double best reporter in history. You might never have heard of me, or Bigfoot, or Ben Franklin, or the Mars rover, or President Taft's mustache waxer, or Johnny Appleseed, if she hadn't been out there writing down their stories for the newspaper. And before she could write 'em down, she had to chase 'em down. The stories about her chasing stories are so wild and crazy that I decided to write them down myself for you to read. But I'm a little on the big side, so I can't just sit down and write a book. That's because there's no chair big enough for me to sit in, and no paper big enough for me to write on. Last time, I wrote down my story on the state of Kansas, but they asked me to stop because they had to plant some corn. So, my friend Sonia Henney had an idea. We'd wait until the Great Lakes freeze up, then put on some ice skates and spell out the words by doing fancy loops and tricks. Well, that's what I'm doing, and it's going pretty good. But spring is a-coming soon, and the whole dang thing is gonna melt. Last time, I told you about how Nellie got started working for the big city big news and landed her stories right on the front page. The next day, she wanted to write another story for the front page. But folks, what Nellie didn't seem to get was that there are lots of pages in a newspaper, not just the front one. And the editor's job is to make sure he's got enough stories to put on page 1 and page 2 and page 57. Sometimes the editor sends a reporter out to get a front page story, but other times it's a back page story. Or, worst of all, a buried in the middle next to the underwear ads story. Friends, today I'm gonna tell you about the time Nellie's editor, Brian the editor, gave the front page story to another reporter. Meanwhile, Nellie was supposed to go out and get the buried in the middle next to the underwear ads story. Well, Nellie didn't like that one little bit. But the question is, what was she going to do about it? Well, you just gotta keep on reading to find out. You better hurry up. Chapter 2. Nellie always wanted to be the first one to arrive at the newspaper office so she didn't miss anything. So she slept in a filing cabinet drawer right next to her desk. Then, when she'd hear her boss, Brian the editor, opening the front door, she'd pop out and land right in her chair, ready to get started on her next front page story. On this day, she was a little too excited, so when she went popping out, she popped right over her desk and landed in some bean dip left out by the other reporter, Hotshot Terbletsky. "Why do you smell like bean dip?" asked Brian the editor.
"Never mind the bean dip," said Nellie. "I've got a hot tip on a huge front page story."
"Oh, yeah?" said Brian the editor, holding his nose. "What is it?"
"Lewis and Clark have almost crossed the whole country," said Nellie. "Sacagawea, their Native American guide, told me she expects them to get to the Pacific Ocean this afternoon."
"You're right, Nellie," said Brian the editor. "That is a huge front page story."
"Great,"
said Nellie, and she started to tie up her hair with some used typewriter ribbon.
"I'll get out there right away. I can't wait to ask Sacagawea what—"
"Sorry, Nellie," said Brian the editor, checking his clipboard. "But this is Hotshot Terbletsky's story." "Huh," said Hotshot Terbletsky, sticking out his tongue.
"This is an outrage,"
shouted Nellie, whose manners weren't much better. "Sorry, Nellie," said Brian the editor. "But Terbletsky has been covering Lewis and Clark ever since they started out from a Burger King in St. Louis 2 years ago. It's his story." "Yeah, it's my story, not yours," yelled Terbletsky. He grabbed his notebook and ran out the door. "See ya!" Terbletsky yelled. "I gotta go interview Lewis and Clark and get tomorrow's big, huge front page story. Don't forget to get a picture of their cute doggy," Brian the editor yelled after him.
"And get an interview with Sacagawea,"
yelled Nellie. But Terbletsky was already in a taxi headed for Oregon.
"This is an out—"
"Don't worry," said Brian the editor.
"I have an important story for you, too.
Today is the day the
Samuel Morse Company starts selling the new iTelegraph 22.5. "Who cares?"
snapped Nellie. "A lot of people care," said Brian the editor. "Everybody has an iTelegraph in their pocket nowadays," he said.
"Yeah, that's the problem,"
said Nellie.
"Everybody who wants one already has one."
"But this one's even smaller," said Brian the editor.
"But that's not big news. You can't put that on the front page."
"I'm not," said Brian the editor. "I'm going to put it on page 57.
57?
Gasped Nellie in horror.
"But that's where the underwear ads go."
"Yep," said Brian the editor. "And every day someone has to write the story that goes next to the underwear ads. And today, that somebody is you."
"No, it's not,"
insisted Nellie. "Yes, it is, if you want to keep your job," said Brian the editor. He made a little note on his clipboard. "The sale starts at 5 o'clock. Be there, or else." He went into his office and slammed the door.
"This is an outrage!"
yelled Nellie. But Brian the editor had just installed a soundproof door and didn't hear a thing.